Welcome to the All Things Real Estate Podcast with our very own Josh Barker. With more than 20 years of experience and over 5,000 properties sold, Josh brings a unique perspective to the real estate market. Let's get started.
We're back. Guess who's back? So it's September.
Mm-hmm.
It's been raining. Thank God.
I know.
It's been awesome, man. Slept with the window open. It was just awesome. Loved it. Got up, went for a walk in the morning, and wasn't breaking out in a sweat within a couple of seconds. So I'm very grateful for the change in weather.
Me too. Hopefully it knocks down some of those fires out there for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think officially, well, not officially, but in a few days, officially summer's over. And summer is usually a big time in real estate. We definitely had a different summer this year.
Yeah, we did.
But I think, this is a podcast about real estate.
Sure.
So
you don't want to talk about the flowers and the birds?
Yeah. Well, I like the effect it has on it. But usually, summer is like, I think is spring or summer the biggest time for real estate as far as like the sales volume usually goes up?
Well, the sales volume, the amount of inventory going to the market picks up in the spring heavily. Mm-hmm. And then, the highest pending numbers are typically in June and July.
And this year's been a little bit different, partly because we came out of, arguably the white hot market for Shasta and Tehama ever, at least in our lifetime. And then on top of that, the big news was that interest rates just kept climbing, which they just came up again, right?
Well, last week the Fed came out and, it wasn't necessarily just the Fed, but, they came out with the consumer price index and said that it was like at 8.3. They were projecting 8.1, so it kind of went the wrong way. Mm-hmm. It's probably putting some pressure on the Fed right now to raise those interest rates this week, and maybe even by the time this podcast gets out for everybody to listen to, the Fed may have already made their decision. But if you were to take the average of the 15 different experts out there, they'd probably tell you it's going to be 0.75%. 0.75 is what the Fed is likely going to raise the interest rates by.
Which means mortgage rates are probably going to go up.
There'll be some pressure. Yeah, maybe 0.25%. There'll be some pressure there. And it's interesting, Joey, because I had this conversation with about a half a dozen different brokers that do the stock trading. Mm-hmm. I've talked to mortgage lenders, and they're challenged right now because all that refinance is gone.
Yeah.
And I've talked to some home builders, and really there's this like sentiment, just keeping it real, where they're just like down and concerned, and it's interesting because it's not like we don't see this all the time. I mean, it doesn't happen once a year, but real estate, stock market, all these markets, they always cycle. I mean, you can't stay hot forever. And so I think my only thing right now is I keep on reminding them, like, hey, if you act surprised, that's almost naive when you've been in this business for a long time. You know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely.
Because things just go through cycles, and just, a good dose of calming down is probably a good idea.
Well, the average person isn't like you and I, where we're plugged into real estate. So it's like kind of like we know all this.
Right.
You know what I mean? And it's usually they get it in quips, sound bites, clickbait, things like that. And the bottom line is the market is still very good.
Yeah.
The numbers this is still a seller's market. It's on the edge of a seller's market, right?
Yeah. I mean, statistically, you look, I think we're at 2.93 months supply of homes for sale.
Anything under 3?
Yeah. 0 to 3 months is a seller's market. 4 to 5 is neutral. 6 and more is a buyer's market. And we're on the tail end of a seller's market.
Yeah.
But the reporters aren't going to say that because they don't report news. No. They sell news.
Exactly.
And they try to, let me pause my thing.
I think that's the bat signal. I
think
we've got to go.
Signal. Yeah, sorry for your listeners hearing that. But no, it's really a situation where people just have to recognize it's part of what happens in the market. Not a big deal.
And, the other thing is that the market was being driven by really low interest rates. There were a number of factors that were driving the market. And now we're kind of in a normal market. And so the idea, at least to me, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but at least to me, the idea is that in those hot markets, a bunch of people are in real estate purely out of speculation. They're not buying their first home.
Right.
They're not getting a larger home because they're extending their family. They're not, hey, my kids are off to college, I'm down. So these are just people like, hey, I pulled my money out of my 401k. I'm going to flip a house. And they push that market. And what's happened is the incentives for them to be in the market have disappeared. So those people are slowly disappearing.
Yep.
But the regular driving the forces year in, year out are People are still moving here.
Yeah.
People are still buying a first home.
Yep.
And speaking of buying a first home, you still have, just like you've seen housing go up, you've seen rent go up, I think, at even higher rates.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at like rentdata.org, I mean, I'm going to cite that so everybody can go there and look at it. But
I'll
like
link it in the...
Yeah, link it. That's good. It's a 3-bedroom, 2-bath home with a 2-car garage, and the city of Reading is averaging about $1,800 a month right now.
Yeah.
That's what that report would say. And I think most people, they have to make a decision, about housing in general. It's like, well, do I rent or do I buy? Well, if you're evaluating, do I buy? It's like, well, the next question is, well, where is the market right now? Is it going up or going down or sideways? And I think that, we've already given back. I don't know, each market. So when you hear this, don't go, oh my gosh, it's my house. But if you were to take, the average collectively in the market, we're probably down about 10% in terms of the average selling price.
From last year, from the height? Or
Yeah, so since about November of last year.
Which was just about
9-10 months ago.
It probably peaked somewhere around there. Interest rates started changing in December, so it's
they did.
Yeah.
And that's really what the whole story is about, is that in Shasta County, there's a huge percentage of the purchases. I'd be speculating, but it's probably close to 90% of purchases right now are financed. And so with it being that high, that means that when the interest rate goes up like it does, that for every 1% it raises, it impacts the purchasing power by up to 10%. So rates went from 3.25% to 6.5%. Well, that's double. I mean, it went up a full 100% higher than it was before, diminishing purchasing power. And that's where the situation in the market is right now, where you have average sales prices are trying to adjust to the fact that the average buyer qualifies for a lower purchase price. You know what I mean? Because buyers qualify for whatever payment they qualify for. The rate is what dictates how much they can buy. And the difference between those two, there's some reconciliation that's taking place right now, and we're watching it in real time. So people ask, well, what's the tea leaf say? Where's the market going? It's like, well, if rates stay high, prices are going to continue to soften. If rates go down, at least for Shasta County, if the rates go down, then you could expect housing prices to firm up. And so everybody kind of has the same data.
And I think about like we talk about the market in this real general term, and there are people within the market. We talk about segments, but when I think about like a young couple, first time buyers, should they buy? My thought is absolutely. Even you go, well, the average rent's $1,800, and you're telling me now with interest rates, that same home, my payment would now be $2,100 versus a year ago it would have been a lot less, right? Those numbers are going to fluctuate back and forth.
Yep.
And so we've said this term before. I first time I heard it was months ago, but you marry the home, you date the interest rate.
Yep.
So you lock the home in now, and then when interest rates come down, you've built some equity, you've extended your credit. Hey, they're making their payment, and you refinance. But waiting until that interest rate comes down, it's like, well, you're trying to time it. It's like, to me, it's very similar to the stock market, where they show the people that constantly try to time the stock market historically do very poorly.
Right.
Very poorly. And so this idea of, I'll jump into the market when housing's, the lowest and interest rates are low, like that doesn't happen.
No.
Those things are crossing over each other. They're affecting each other.
They are. I mean, and it maybe for somebody that's listening to this right now, think about the buyers that were purchasing last year and, from July until, let's say, October, for example, just to take a segment of the market. They were pretty optimistic buying, right? The reality is that it's a better opportunity to buy today than it was then.
From a price of the home standpoint.
Exactly, from the price standpoint, right? And so to your point that you just said a minute ago, if you marry the home but you date the interest rate, would you rather buy while prices are a little softer and then know that you can refinance when the rate drops? Or would you rather purchase when the prices are super high, right? And now there's no opportunity to refinance because the rate probably was already pretty low in the first place.
I think if you purchased last year and you extended yourself, you might be in trouble. But if you purchased last year, you should have had a fantastic rate.
Right.
And you love the fact that those rents are going up because you've locked in that 3%.
That living expense is locked in.
Exactly.
Yep.
And so it's just one of those things that's where the people time it the wrong way. You know what I mean? Or they extend themselves.
Yeah.
And that was one of the things that we didn't see in the last market that we saw in the market that hit hard in the early 2000s was that I think it was, you said 10% of the market were investors. So the vast majority of people should have been people buying a home for themselves.
Right now, in the last, it's probably very low 10% now. But
yeah, the interest
over
rates.
the last 24 months, it's probably averaged about 10% was investor related. Not including home builders and stuff. That's a different category. That's more of a speculation, buying a piece of property, building a house, and then selling it for a profit. So, but for speculation, like I bought a house with the anticipation of it appreciating, and me selling it or renting it or what have you, it was only about 10% of the market here in the last couple of years. But going back to 2005, in that era, almost 40% or more of it was speculation.
Everyone was leveraged.
Everyone was leveraged. And
when it came down hard.
That's right. But you know what? There is something to talk about right now is that I'm beginning to see those variable interest rates coming out.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And now they're coming out and they're saying, but the Dodd-Frank bill says that we have to make sure we verify their employment. We have to make sure we verify their income and expenses. There's a ratio that's still, very solid. And I think all of that is probably true. But variable interest rates are coming back again, and they were not here 2 years ago. And so or at least in any kind of a way that's recognizable. So now I'm starting to see these loosening of, not so much loosening of the lending guidelines, because I think they're probably more heavily scrutinized, because I think you have to have larger down payments, more reserves, probably even more of a stable P&L, profit and loss, in order to qualify for those variable rates. But it does give you an idea that like mortgage lenders are going, or companies and banks are saying, hey, wait a minute, these rates are pretty high. They're probably not going to be here for very long before they start to go back the other way. So let's offer a variable interest rate, knowing that these folks are probably going to refinance out of this loan, in the next 2 or 3 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Man, that starts to get there's so many variables and so many different, this stuff is, I always think about like when somebody goes, well, it's not rocket science, right? They'll say that term, and usually it has to do with something. I remember one time I was doing this show, and there was a few of us, and we were talking about social issues, and one of them goes, well, it's not rocket science. And I said, yeah, because rocket science is easy compared to this.
Yeah.
I mean, rocket science is not hard. Social science is hard, trying to figure out why.
What people are going to do and why they're doing it. Yeah.
Because one of the biggest variables is emotion.
Yeah.
There was no logic to that. Everyone just ran right off that cliff. They got so scared. So there's a lot of variables in here. I think the market's normalizing. I think you've talked about how it's not good in the long run. Everyone loves it. Yeah, man, my equity's going up. That's not good in the long run for your community, because your children aren't going to be able to purchase a home if this continues. You need the market to kind of ebb and flow just a little bit with, what was the number you gave that you said like a good yearly appreciation is? 2
to 4%, right in that range.
Something like that. And so, what were we at, like 20?
Oh, well, and that's the point I was making at the beginning of this podcast is like, look, if you have periods of massive expansion in terms of valuation, there is a process of correction that's going to take place. That's just normal. And again, if somebody didn't know that was going to happen, there could be true naivety, right? That's totally normal. If you haven't been in the market before, you didn't understand that it did that. But for those who've been around a while, that's probably not a smart thing to be thinking. You should know better if market cycles. So I've constantly just reminding people. I do this as much as I can with people. It's like, look, the markets are going to, if you have periods of expansion, you have periods of contraction, right? And be ready for the wild card. The wild card is, like the last one we have, COVID. Well, nobody knew in December, January that COVID was going to hit in March of 2020.
Yeah.
Nobody knew that was going to happen. It came out of nowhere, right? And then you kind of look at what happens with, the Ukraine war or something. That had an impact on the cost of fuel and everything else. Well, nobody knew that was going to happen 3 months before it happened, or maybe the CIA did, but nobody on Main Street knows that stuff, right? And so, I guess my point is that things are going to happen. And it's okay. Just calm down. Recognize that if you need a place to live, you've got a couple choices: live with someone, right, a family member or what have you, or rent, or purchase. And any one of those things is fine. But if you choose to purchase, I would say recognize you're probably going to be in that home for a period of time, right? Yeah. We're probably going to see a market that's going to be fluctuating up and down a little bit over the next year or two, because, we're going through an adjustment period where interest rates are high. They're probably going to come back down at some point, and that's going to have an impact on pricing, because home values will probably tighten up really quick when that happens. But the long-term prospect, you're going to be at home for a period of time, you're going to be great.
Let me ask you a question, and if you don't know the answer to this, it's okay, because this is going to come out of left field. If we see deflation kick in, right? If we see, so right now, the Feds are increasing interest rates in an attempt to counter inflation.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are like, well, the inflation is there because there was a printing and distribution of money, agreed, but also supply chains were heavily impacted.
Sure.
If over the next year or two, we see the supply chains start to catch up,
Yep.
like all the stuff, all the COVID, the ships being off the coast for a year, all that stuff, we get back to normal, where supply chains are kind of normal.
A new normal.
And we're kind of seeing that, like, for example, we're getting the contractor is finally being able to build our garage. We had to do this 2-car garage. And they said, hey, well, good news, because we signed a contract a year ago. They said supplies, materials have dropped dramatically.
Oh, yeah.
Like we're going to be able to do it cheaper.
Yeah.
I mean, when was the last time you heard that?
Yeah.
And that's why, because supply chains are kind of catching up
right.
now. That crazy, wood, plywood, OSB that went up, it's come back down. So the thing, I read a couple of things that said, hey, if those supply chains catch up, and you've still got these higher interest rates, you're going to actually see deflation, right? So that means suddenly prices start to drop. Do you have any idea what effect a deflationary market might have for real estate?
Well, that's a really good question, man. I don't know, man. I'd have to think through all of that.
Sorry, I knew that was out of left field, but I've been thinking about it. And when I decided that you have all the other answers, I figured you know. You're like, Joey, it's real easy. Now let's look at Japan from 87 to 92.
Well, this is proof, Marcus, that I don't have, this isn't scripted. You're right about the supply chain. I mean, right now we are seeing things soften up, but think of it more of a supply and demand, right?
Yeah.
If my warehouses now are becoming full.
Yes.
Okay. I need to make room because I still have a whole bunch of stuff coming in, right?
That's right.
And so if my warehouse is full, I've got one of two choices, right? I can stop the orders from coming in, but there's profit in that, and bringing those orders in, or I would need to start discounting my pricing so I can make some room in my warehouse. And as soon as they start making that decision, now a competitor sees that I've made that decision. Now they want to get stuff out of their warehouse too. And so you kind of see the snowball effect of things beginning to loosen up, prices starting to come down. And so to your point, I totally agree that as the supply chain reestablishes itself, you are going to see the cost of materials and goods going down.
I think so.
And I think that'll happen before labor does.
Yes.
Okay. And I know for the people listening to this, I just say that labor and material and supply costs are two different things, because labor and stuff, if I still have margin in there, I'll drop my price. It doesn't matter. I'll drop it. But if you're asking somebody to drop their wages, that has an impact on what the other things that they're able to do.
I don't see that happening for a long time.
It's going to be a challenge, because it's almost like you're going to have a situation where a lot of people are going to say, I'm not willing to work for less. And it's like, well, I can't afford you anymore. And then you start to see some layoffs, right? So that's where the recession piece that that is looming out there. I think a lot of experts are saying they're projecting in the first quarter of next year. Even although some people would say we're in it now, but going into a recessionary period, if I don't have as much work for my employees, what am I going to do?
Yeah, you got to lay people off.
Yeah, and we can't deny the fact. I mean, I'm reading reports right now of companies that are making these layoffs now. I'm seeing 10% cuts, 10, 20% cuts. Our industries right now are getting cut. I mean, lenders are getting blown out left and right. Real estate agents, because the volumes have dropped, are beginning to leave. So there's some impacts.
Some tech
there.
giants are doing it too. I just saw that Twilio laid off, I think, 800 people.
They did. It was about 10% of their overall, workforce. So
that's a tech company.
Yep.
Big time tech company.
Yep. So it's something that we just know that that this reconciliation, if you will, is coming. And I think it's smart to say, okay, well, if that's coming, what is it going to look like? Well, inventories, like we said, they're 2.93% or 2.93 supply, 2.39 or 2.93 months supply of homes for sale. That's not a lot of inventory.
No.
If that inventory was 6, 7, 8 months, that's when you'd really see things getting soft.
Okay. Because I was going to think in a deflationary period, cash is going to be king again, right?
It should be.
I think because interest rates this is where we're getting way out of my I'm not an economist. I play one on TV, but I'm not an economist. But I'm thinking like, okay, well, if prices start going down, cash is going to be king, and then what are they going to do with credit? Are interest rates going to come down to try to counter that, or it starts to get
it gets really weird because again, real estate mortgages, so people getting loans to buy homes, that rate is a lot different than what the Fed's doing right now. Mm-hmm. Mortgage-backed securities are all about, investors who buy those mortgages, knowing that most people pay them off in 4 or 5 years, and they buy it at a coupon rate, right? So, if the Federal Reserve decided to go out there and repurchase a lot of these mortgage-backed securities, if they came out today and said, you know what, we'll buy everything funded we'll buy coupons at 4% all day long. The mortgage lenders would then go out and sell these loans at 4%. Mm-hmm. And they would have a buyer in the market, which would be the Federal Reserve, buying them at 4%. So, with a policy action, they could change the rate on the mortgages today. And this is the thing that I'm constantly aware of in my mind when I look at the valuation of real estate. It's like, you know what? Once real estate really gets hit, it's highly likely the Federal Reserve would step in. And shore that up, because what they don't want is a foreclosure market. What they don't want is a massive short sale market where you're trying to sell your home for less than you owe on it, because the expense that they carry and the banks carry and the taxpayer has to pay to get people out of that situation, because everybody pays when that happens, is greater than if they were just to start buying those mortgage-backed securities. Does that make sense?
Oh, it totally makes sense.
And so I'm kind of bullish on the Fed stepping in. And I think that would be a lesson they've learned from last time.
And also, what we're talking about is, the overall California market versus the renting market. One of the great things that we have going for us in this market is low supply. Mm-hmm. That keeps prices steady.
It does.
Yes, they're down a little bit from the super high
because interest rates are up.
But they didn't plummet.
No, it's not an oversupply issue.
No,
because as soon as rates go down just a little bit, we see it every weekend here. When rates are 6.5, things are a little soft, right? Drops to 6, boom. The next week, the corresponding effect, a week later, buyer demand picks up.
Yep.
The demand is there. Mm-hmm. It's not a demand issue. It's an affordability issue. You know what I mean? That's why I'm confident that when rates go down, prices immediately stop. And they start to firm up, and if they really go down, they go up. Because the demand is there. People want to purchase. They do. We're seeing it every day. But the affordability is a hurdle that they absolutely have to be able to overcome.
Case in point to your materials versus labor, my contractor didn't tell me he was going to do it for cheaper. He just said my materials were going to be. He didn't say the good news is I'm taking 20% reduction in pay. No.
But if there's 3 contractors competing for your job, then now all of a sudden they start making decisions on labor too.
I don't see that happening. And everybody knows I have a crystal ball and I nail it every time. But I just don't see that happening because I don't think we have the labor. I don't think there's an abundance of labor. Maybe there will be. But
well, there isn't today because there's still people wanting to do stuff.
Yeah.
But if you look around at the real estate construction boom over the last 24, 36 months, okay, if that demand gets killed off over the next, let's say, 6 to 12 months for some reason, you're going to have skilled labor without a lot of work. What do?
Yeah.
What do? They got to make a decision, right? Either I'm not working or I'm going to work for a little less. That's the decisions that will have to be made. I've seen this because I remember this in 05, 06, and I didn't think it was going to happen either back then. And quite honestly, all I'm doing is borrowing from back then. Mm-hmm. People were getting paid a lot of money to build stuff. Mm-hmm. The market corrected, all right? And when it did, that meant that the cost of labor started going down. I built a home in 2007, right? Mm-hmm. Built it for $100 a foot.
Oh,
I know. Sorry, everybody. But if I would have built it 2 years before, I probably would have paid about $130 to $140 a foot.
Yeah.
Okay. Part of that was the supply and the cost of materials going down a little bit, but most of it was in labor.
Yeah.
Most of it was because of labor. People were willing to do more, to do work for a little bit less.
Okay. Yeah. So, what's funny is you don't get a jobs report for Shasta County, do you? Does anyone publish something like that?
Yeah, that's a good question, man. For anybody that's listening to this, if you have it, let us know.
Yeah, no kidding. I'd love to link to that.
Yeah.
Because I still think, what's funny is now that you're bringing that up, I was talking to a couple of contractors I know, and they're still, it's funny because the mentality is, they were talking about how they're not booked out as far now as they were.
Right.
And then that conversation shifted to, they were like, yeah, I'm only like 9 weeks out. And you're like, that 9 weeks, that's over 2 months. And oh yeah, but this time last year I was 7 months out.
That's right.
And then it shifted to, okay, well, 4 years ago, what were you? And they're like, oh, we were about 7 to 9 weeks out. I'm like, so this is a normal market. Like, but in their mind, they're so used to that white hot market. They're like, they're freezing up a little bit. And they also said people are, So I don't know where that's going to go, but all of that.
Well, mine's just a guess, but I mean, I'm taking a little bit of what I saw last time and kind of applying it this time and thinking about supply and demand. If the demand for labor goes down and the supply for it is 4 minutes left, Marcus, thanks. But the ability, the number of people that are available to do the work is pretty high. What do people do? Because a ton of that was in profit, right? So if you take a couple of years ago, like where everybody was rebuilding from the car fire, right? A lot of that was on insurance money.
Oh yeah.
So they were charging a lot of money, okay, to build a home. The supplies wasn't that much higher. What was higher?
Labor.
Labor went up. Why? Well, because there was only so many resources of labor available. People were basically stealing, labor from each other. I'll hire you on my crew for more money, kind of a thing, right? And that was happening a lot. But now that insurance money is gone, okay, they can't necessarily charge the same amount anymore. And so this is what the impact is. And I can't help but think that the cost of labor for a lot of what we're looking at right now, I'm not saying it's going to go down in half, but for it to go down, it wouldn't surprise me at all.
Well, yeah, when you say it like that, I forgot about that, and it was pretty crazy. People were racing to get those homes rebuilt, and some of the contractors were like, I remember hearing some of the people, and they were months and months and months out, and then COVID hits, the supply chain gets completely disrupted, and we've gone through quite a bit the last couple of years. Not
all those wild cards, but remember, and just to put a little bit of a red bow on this thing here, if somebody's making a little bit less in the labor market, but the cost of all your goods and services are also going down, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to hurt.
It's in relation to each other.
It's in relation to each other.
You get a 20% raise and products go up 30%, you lost money.
Right.
And vice versa.
Exactly. And you got to think about the supply and demand issue and what's created as a result of that.
To me, all of this that we're talking about is if you don't own a home and you can afford to buy, then all this stuff doesn't matter. You need to buy a home.
Well, it's an asset. Securing a position in the market, you've secured an asset. So if that asset goes up in value, you receive the benefit. It goes down in value, you hold it longer.
And also, if you're renting a house, you got two houses side by side, one's being rented, one's being owned. I know in my neighborhood, who the homeowners are.
Sure.
You just, on the weekend, instead of partying at the local brewery, they're out there pulling weeds and putting fresh paint on the trim. And it's like increasing
adding
the value.
That's right.
Adding
and the renter's
to the value. Didn't take my trash out again. It's overflowing. So you can tell. So it's like that. I think that's even a good thing for young people.
100%. Totally agree.
All of these things that we're kind of talking about, I'm trying to figure out if I should dump my 401k and buy a triplex, or should I sell a duplex and
calm
buy Apple
down,
stock.
Be diversified, relax, take a deep breath, recognize that this, as with all things, this will come to pass too. And be smart about it. Just don't do emotional stuff. Recognize that, look, buying and selling of real estate, if you're doing it for, I'm going to try to flip it, make a quick profit. This is not Bitcoin. Don't think that this
is
Bitcoin.
Down.
It's
big
down.
Time.
It's down big time, right? It's a long-term strategy, but I've watched a lot of people, and I mean a lot of people retire because of their investments in real estate.
Oh yeah.
So I would strongly encourage looking at the numbers. So in any case.
Well, thank you, Josh. I appreciate it. I hope we helped some people today.
I don't know if we did or not, man.
I feel like we did good.
All right. That's great. So, Well, thanks for your time. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you, sir. See you next month.
Okay.
If you're enjoying the All Things Real Estate podcast, please feel free to subscribe, rate, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. That helps others find the show, and we really appreciate it. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next episode.